Mother-in-law's last words shocked everyone. What if the last words you heard from someone you loved weren't meant for you at all? The mansion was heavy with silence the night Eleanor Whitmore took her final breath. A woman of iron will and whispered secrets, she left behind more than her fortune. Her last words, uttered in a trembling voice that carried both warning and accusation, fell upon the family like a curse. No one spoke of them aloud, but every pair of eyes at her bedside betrayed fear, confusion, and something darker. Guilt. Clara, the daughter-in-law, stood frozen, her heart pounding louder than the ticking clock on the wall. She had always believed she understood her mother-in-law, strict, controlling, but predictable. Yet in those final moments, Eleanor had shattered that illusion with a single, haunting sentence, a sentence that refused to leave Clara's mind. Now, standing at the edge of a story no one wished to tell, Clara asked herself, who was Eleanor speaking to, and perhaps more importantly, what secret was meant to die with her? Part 1. Funeral Scene. What if the silence of a funeral carried more secrets than the life of the person it mourned? The old Whitmore mansion loomed over the hill like a sentinel of grief. Its windows shuddered, its ivy-covered walls wet with the drizzle of late autumn. The guests moved in solemn lines toward the family chapel, their black umbrellas forming a somber sea against the pale gray sky. Yet beneath the ritual of mourning, whispers stirred, hushed, broken, urgent. Everyone present knew Eleanor Whitmore's last words had not been of comfort or blessing, but of something else entirely, something unsettling. Clara Whitmore felt the weight of those whispers pressing against her as she stepped from the black car. Her hand trembled in Michael's, though his grip was firm, almost too firm, as if he feared she might drift away with the fog that swirled around the mansion gates. She tilted her face toward him, searching for his eyes, but he kept them fixed on the chapel. His jaw was tight, and his silence carried an head she couldn't name. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with the scent of lilies and polished wood. The casket lay at the front, draped in velvet, a photograph of Eleanor perched upon it. The woman's face in the picture was stern, lips pressed into the familiar half-frown she wore in life. Clara had never seen her mother-in-law smile without calculation. Even now, even in death, the portrait seemed to judge everyone in the room. The priest's voice droned in the distance, but Clara's mind was caught in a loop. Her last words, that faint, raspy whisper in the hospital room 3 nights ago. She had stood near Eleanor's bed, watching the frail body struggle for breath, believing the end would be marked by a sigh or perhaps the name of her son. Instead, Eleanor had turned her dimming eyes not to Michael, but to Clara. Her lips had parted, and with a strength that seemed unnatural in her failing state, she spoke. "They will take everything, unless you stop him." Those words had carved into Clara's mind like a knife. At first she thought she had misheard, but the tremor in Eleanor's gaze, the deliberate grip of her hand around Clara's wrist, it was no mistake. She had meant it. She had chosen Clara as the recipient of her final secret. Clara hadn't told anyone, not Michael, not the nurses, not the priest, who now praised Eleanor's virtues. It wasn't fear that silenced her. It was confusion. Who was they? Who was him? And why had Eleanor chosen her, the daughter-in-law she had never fully trusted, to carry this cryptic burden? As the choir sang softly, Clara's gaze swept over the family pews. There sat Margaret, Eleanor's younger sister, whose thin smile never reached her eyes. 2 rows behind, the Whitmore cousins, whispering into each other's ears as if the funeral were an inconvenience, and near the back, a man Clara didn't recognize, tall, sharply dressed, with an expression too alert for a mourner. He was watching the casket, but occasionally his eyes flicked toward her. The priest closed his prayer. Michael rose, stepping toward the podium. His words were steady, but his voice cracked once, briefly, when he called his mother a pillar of strength. Clara watched him carefully. He was grieving, yes, but there was something guarded about the way he avoided her gaze, as though he too was hiding a piece of those final moments. When the service ended, pallbearers carried the casket out into the rain. Umbrellas bloomed again, shielding black hats and veils. Clara followed closely behind Michael, her heels sinking into the wet earth as they approached the family plot. The mansion loomed in the distance, dark against the mist. As the casket lowered into the ground, a gust of "They will take everything, unless you stop him." Suddenly she realized she wasn't the only one reliving those words. Margaret, Eleanor's sister, glanced at her sharply, almost knowingly, as if she too carried knowledge unsuited for daylight. And behind the crowd, the tall stranger raised his umbrella and stepped away from the group, disappearing toward the mansion. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to run after him, demand answers, but Michael's hand pressed against her back, steadying her before she could move. His whisper brushed against her ear. "Stay close. Don't wander." The words sounded protective, but also commanding. As earth thudded against the coffin, Clara closed her eyes. Somewhere between the prayers, the whispers, and the shadows of the mansion, she understood that this funeral was not an ending. It was the beginning. Eleanor had left behind more than a fortune. She had left behind a warning. And Clara was the only one who had truly heard it. Yet even now, even as the casket sank into the soil, one question burned louder than the rest. What exactly had Eleanor wanted her to stop? Part 2. The mansion's silence. What if a house could remember more than the people who live within its walls? By the time the last mourners had drifted away and the grave was covered, the Whitmore mansion seemed to pull the fog closer, swallowing every trace of warmth. Clara followed Michael up the stone steps, her heels clicking softly against the wet marble. The heavy front doors creaked open, and the silence that met her felt alive, as though the house itself had been waiting for them to return. The grand foyer spread out before her, chandeliers dimmed, portraits of ancestors gazing down from the big paneled walls, and the faint smell of wax and dust lingering in the air. She had always found the mansion cold, but tonight, grief seemed to deepen its chill. Yet Clara sensed something more, something hidden beneath the surface, like a note held too long in the throat of a violin. Michael shrugged off his coat and muttered something about meeting the lawyer tomorrow. His movements were precise, distracted, as if following a script. Clara lingered, her eyes drawn upward to the balcony rail that curved above the foyer. For just a moment she thought she saw a figure standing there, slight, unmoving, watching. She blinked, and the shadow was gone. "Clara," Michael's voice cut through her thoughts, "don't get lost. We'll only be here a few days." A few days. That was always his promise when they visited. But Eleanor had ensured their stays stretched longer. Clara had lived in this house for months at a time, feeling both like a guest and a prisoner. Now, with Eleanor gone, she should have felt liberated. Instead, her chest tightened with unease. She wandered into the parlor, where the fire had burned low. The room was lined with shelves of old books and velvet drapes that swallowed the light. On the mantel stood a collection of crystal figurines Eleanor had adored. Clara reached for one, tracing its delicate edge. She remembered Eleanor's sharp warning the first time she had touched them. "Be careful, dear. Some things break too easily, and others are meant never to be touched at all." A floorboard creaked. Clara turned sharply. No one was there. just the silence stretching long between walls, thick enough to feel. Later, as the family gathered for supper, the silence deepened in another way. The long dining table was set for 6, though only 5 seats were filled. Clara, Michael, Margaret, and the 2 cousins, Daniel and Sylvia. The empty chair at the head remained untouched, as though Eleanor herself might yet sweep into the room and claim it. Margaret lifted her wine glass, her eyes glittering in the candlelight. "To Eleanor," she said smoothly. "May she rest, and may we honor her in all ways." The toast was hollow, but everyone drank. Clara forced the liquid down, her stomach tight. It wasn't long before the cousins began whispering. Clara caught fragments. Inheritance, trust fund, division. Michael stiffened beside her, his jaw flexing. Margaret, however, smiled faintly, as if she relished their petty arguments. When the plates were cleared, Clara excused herself. She needed air. She wandered through the dim corridors until she reached the back of the mansion. Here the walls seemed narrower, lined with locked doors. Eleanor had forbidden her from exploring this wing, calling it unfinished and dangerous, but Clara remembered the night she had gotten lost here once, years ago. She had heard voices behind one of the locked doors, voices speaking in low, urgent tones. When she told Michael, he dismissed it as servants. Yet no servants ever admitted to being there. Now, in the silence of the empty house, Clara pressed her hand against one of those doors. The wood was cold, unyielding. She leaned closer, almost expecting to hear a whisper from the other side. Nothing. Only her heartbeat. Still, Eleanor's last words gnawed at her. "They will take everything, unless you stop him." Could the secret lie somewhere in this forbidden wing? That night, sleep came reluctantly. Clara lay awake in the guest bedroom, staring at the ceiling while the wind rattled the shutters. Michael slept heavily beside her, his breathing uneven. Sometime past midnight, a sound stirred her from half-dreams. The faint click of a door, opening down the hall. Clara slipped from bed, pulling her robe around her. She crept into the corridor, her bare feet cold against the marble. The sound came again. Footsteps, light but deliberate. She followed them past the portraits, past the long rug, until she reached the forbidden wing. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Pressed in. Then, a faint glimmer. A door at the very end of the corridor was slightly ajar, a thin line of light spilling through. Clara's breath caught. She reached out, fingers trembling, and pushed the door open just enough to see. Inside was a study she had never entered before. The air was stale, the curtains drawn, and stacks of papers covered the desk. In the center, lit by a single lamp, was Margaret. She sat with her back to the door, reading intently. But it wasn't just the presence of Margaret that chilled Clara. It was the object in her hand. A small leather-bound journal. One Clara recognized instantly. It had belonged to Eleanor. Margaret turned a page, her lips curling into the faintest smile. She whispered something to herself, too soft for Clara to hear. Clara's hand tightened on the doorframe. The last words rang louder in her skull. "Unless you stop him." But as she stared at Margaret, her certainty faltered. Could it be her? Before she could retreat, Margaret snapped the journal shut. She tilted her head slightly, as though she had known Clara was watching all along. "Can't sleep, dear?" Margaret's voice slid through the silence, like a blade. Clara froze. The mansion held its breath, and in that stillness she realized. Silence wasn't emptiness at all. Silence was waiting. Part 3. The Journal. What if the answers you seek were written down, yet designed to mislead you? The moment Margaret's voice reached her, Clara felt her throat tighten. She forced a polite smile, the kind one uses at dinner tables where knives gleam too close. "I couldn't sleep," Clara murmured. "The house feels different without her." Margaret's eyes lingered, calculating. She set the leather-bound journal on the desk with deliberate care, as though placing a king on a chessboard. "Grief unsettles the air, doesn't it?" she said smoothly. "It wakes things inside us we'd rather keep asleep." Clara nodded faintly, backing a step toward the hallway. But before she could retreat, Margaret's tone shifted, almost playful. "You've always been curious, Clara." Eleanor noticed. She wrote about it often. The words slid into Clara's chest like hooks. "She wrote about me?" Margaret offered no clarification, only a smile. Then she closed the lamp, plunging the study into shadow, and walked past Clara without another glance. The journal remained on the desk, its presence humming like a live wire. For the next 2 days, Clara couldn't stop thinking about it. Meals with the family became suffocating. Daniel argued over stocks. Sylvia boasted of her Paris flat, and Michael retreated further into himself, sipping whiskey by the fire. All the while, Margaret watched Clara with those unblinking eyes, as though daring her to step closer to the truth. On the third night, when the house lay heavy with sleep, Clara made her move. She padded barefoot through the dark corridors, past portraits that seemed to tilt their heads as she passed, until she reached the forbidden study. The door creaked open slowly, the scent of dust and old paper greeting her like an accomplice. There it was, the journal. Its cover worn, corners softened by years of touch. She picked it up, her fingers tingling, and carried it to the desk. The first page bore Eleanor's familiar script, neat and sharp. "To those who find these words, know this: the truth is never in plain sight." Clara's pulse quickened. She flipped through the entries, some banal, recounting garden parties, household disputes, even recipes. Yet scattered among them were fragments that made her breath falter. "The fortune is not what they believe. A stranger walks among us. Trust only the one who watches silently." Each phrase seemed designed like a riddle. And more than once, Clara saw her own name. Clara is too gentle for this world. But gentleness can be dangerous when sharpened. Her chest tightened. What had Eleanor meant? Was it admiration or warning? Turning deeper into the journal, she found pages written in a different ink, hurried and uneven. Here the words grew, darker. "He will come for it. He will take everything. Unless she stops him." Clara's breath caught. "Unless she stops him," the same words Eleanor had whispered on her deathbed. Her eyes raced to the next line, but it ended abruptly, ink blotched, as though the pen had been ripped away mid-sentence. Suddenly, a floorboard groaned behind her. Clara spun, clutching the journal to her chest. The doorway was empty, but she knew the sound hadn't come from her imagination. Someone was out there, watching. She doused the lamp quickly and slipped into the hall, every step heavy with dread. She pressed the journal against her ribs beneath her robe, determined not to let it go. Back in the guest bedroom, she slid beneath the covers, feigning sleep until Michael's breathing evened again. Only then did she open the journal once more, under the dim glow of the bedside lamp. She found something she hadn't noticed before, a small envelope tucked between 2 pages. Her name was scrolled across it in Eleanor's unmistakable hand. Clara's hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, brittle with age. The message was short, almost cryptic. "Do not trust the blood you married into. The house itself will reveal him. Watch the doors that remain locked." Her breath hitched. The letter was signed only with Eleanor's initial. Clara folded the paper quickly as Michael stirred beside her. She slipped both letter and journal under the mattress, her heart pounding so loudly she feared it might wake him. Sleep never came. Instead, she lay awake, replaying Eleanor's warning. "Do not trust the blood you married into. Michael." Daniel, Sylvia, Margaret. All of them bore Whitmore blood, and all of them were suspects in a secret she didn't yet understand. By dawn, the journal's weight beneath her mattress felt like a secret heartbeat, pulsing against the bed frame. At breakfast, Margaret poured tea with a faint smile, her eyes lingering on Clara's every move. Clara forced herself to eat, though her stomach churned. "Did you sleep well, dear?" Margaret asked sweetly. Clara met her gaze across the table, summoning the courage to lie. "Yes, perfectly." Margaret's smile sharpened, almost knowing. "Good. You'll need your strength." Clara's hand froze around her teacup. The silence returned, stretching taut between them. And as Clara lifted the cup to her lips, she wondered, had Margaret already noticed the journal was missing? Part 4. The First Doubts. What if the people closest to you were not who you thought they were? The Whitmore mansion seemed even larger in the days after Eleanor's funeral, its hallways endless, its corners darker. Clara carried the journal like a secret talisman, hidden beneath her mattress by night and tucked into her robe by day whenever she was alone. The words inside had already infected her thoughts, circling endlessly. "Do not trust the blood you married into. Watch the doors that remain locked." At breakfast, Clara studied the faces around the table with new eyes. Michael avoided her gaze, staring into his coffee as though drowning in it. Daniel scrolled through his phone, muttering about investments. Sylvia hummed absent-mindedly, twirling her hair, her face too carefully blank. And Margaret, of course, smiled. Always smiling, as if she knew every secret before it was spoken. Each one of them carried Whitmore blood. Each one could be the him Eleanor had warned about. Clara tried to shake off the paranoia, but the unease only deepened. She remembered Eleanor's last look, her sharp eyes cutting through the veil of death itself. Unless she stops him. Clara hadn't known then who he was, and she still didn't. But the weight of that warning made her feel as though every glance, every whisper in the house carried hidden meaning. That afternoon, she wandered the halls, trailing her fingers, along the wallpaper that had begun to peel in certain corners. She found herself drawn again to the forbidden wing, its locked doors silent, waiting. Her palm rested on the cold brass knob of the first door. She pressed, knowing it would not turn. Still, she tried. Nothing. She leaned closer, listening. At Gay. First only silence, but then faint. So faint she almost doubted herself. A rustling, paper, or movement. She stepped back quickly, heart thudding. Clara wasn't alone. That night she tested her doubts. "Michael," she whispered as they lay in bed, "did your mother ever speak to you about the locked rooms?" His breathing paused, then continued too steadily, too rehearsed. "No. She never explained much about this house. You know that." "But don't you wonder?" Clara pressed. Michael turned toward her, his eyes shadowed in the dim light. "Clara, grief is making you restless. Please, don't go looking for ghosts in rooms that were never meant to matter." The finality in his tone silenced her, but not her thoughts. He had dismissed her question too quickly, almost defensively. Later that evening, Clara slipped from the room once more. She had hidden the journal beneath her robe, the paper pressing against her ribs. She tiptoed to the forbidden wing, stopping at the second locked door. This time she crouched low, peering at the thin line of space between door and floor. A flicker of light. Someone had been in there. Recently. The floorboard. Behind her creaked suddenly. Clara whipped around, her heart in her throat. Sylvia stood at the end of the hallway, barefoot in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. "What are you doing here?" Sylvia's voice was soft, but her eyes were sharp. Clara scrambled for an answer. "I couldn't sleep. I was just walking." Sylvia tilted her head, studying her. Then, with a small smile, she said, "You're not the only one curious about the rooms." Before Clara could reply, Sylvia turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving her more unsettled than before. The following day, Clara decided to test Daniel. She found him in the library, buried in financial reports. "Daniel," she began casually, "Eleanor mentioned something strange before she died. Something about someone trying to take everything. Do you know what she might have meant?" Daniel laughed, short and bitter. "She probably meant all of us. You know how she was. Never trusted anyone. Always thought her fortune was about to be stolen." "But don't you think," Clara pressed, "she might have been warning about someone specific?" Daniel's eyes flicked up sharply, the mask slipping for just a second. "And who do you think she meant, Clara?" The challenge in his voice left her rattled. Everywhere she turned, suspicion grew. Margaret's glances lingered too long. Sylvia's smile hid something. Daniel's temper simmered under the surface, and Michael's silences cut deeper than words. That night, Clara returned to the journal again, desperate for clarity. She flipped through the pages until she found another riddle scrawled in hurried ink. "The truth is locked away, but the key is not what you think. He hides in plain sight. She listens when no one else does." The words made her skin prickle. Who was she? Margaret? Sylvia? Or Eleanor herself, still speaking through her diary? As she closed the book, the sound of a faint knock startled her. She froze, clutching the journal. The knock came again. 3 soft raps against her door. Clara rose slowly and cracked the door open. No one stood in the hallway, only silence. But when she turned back toward the bed, her blood ran cold. Pass. Journal was no longer on the desk where she had left it. Part 5. The Missing Pages. What if the only truth you trusted vanished before your eyes? Clara's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the empty desk. Only moments earlier, Eleanor's journal had been there, its leather cover gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Now, nothing. No sound of footsteps retreating, no click of a door closing. Just silence, thick and pressing, as if the house itself had swallowed the book whole. Her first instinct was panic. She dropped to her knees, fumbling beneath the bed under the rug between the covers. Nothing. Her hands trembled. Someone had been in her room, quiet enough to take it while she checked the door. She rushed to the hallway, peering left and right. Darkness stretched endlessly in both directions, portraits staring down like mute witnesses. Whoever had taken the journal was already gone. Clara closed the door quickly and pressed her back against it, her pulse racing. The journal had been her only anchor, her only clue. Without it, she felt naked in a house filled with watchful eyes. Morning came, but with it, no relief. At breakfast, she forced herself to sit at the long table, every face around her suddenly suspect. Daniel barked at the servants for cold eggs. Sylvia hummed over her tea. Michael leafed through the newspaper, and Margaret watched Clara with a calm, unreadable expression. Clara's spoon clattered against her bowl, betraying her nerves. Michael glanced at her. "Are you all right?" She nodded too quickly. "Just tired." Margaret's smile widened. "Strange dreams, perhaps?" The words made Clara's blood run cold. She wanted to ask Margaret directly, "Did you take it?" But the certainty in Margaret's gaze told her the woman already knew what she was thinking. Later, while the others scattered across the mansion, Clara returned to her room to search again. She stripped the bed, pulled open drawers, even checked the fireplace. But the journal was gone. Not misplaced, stolen. Still, as she sifted through her mattress, her fingers brushed against something thin and crinkled. She pulled it out. A loose sheet of paper, torn roughly along the edge. Her breath caught. It was one of Eleanor's pages. The handwriting was unmistakable, though jagged, rushed. Clara read the words, heart pounding. If the book is taken, it will not matter. What must be known is hidden elsewhere. The truth lives where silence breathes deepest. The key is already in her hands, though she does not yet see it. The message ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if ripped away. Clara sat back on the floor, the paper trembling in her hands. The truth lives where silence breathes deepest. What did Eleanor mean? The locked rooms? The forbidden wing? And what key was already in her hands? That night, Clara lay awake long after Michael's breathing settled. Every sound in the house pressed on her nerves, the groan of the old pipes, the distant whistle of wind, the faintest creak of floorboards somewhere in the forbidden wing. She couldn't stay still. She rose, clutching the torn page, and slipped into the corridor. The mansion's silence seemed alive, pulsing with each step she took toward the locked doors. At the first door, she pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. The second, only the faint hum of emptiness. But at the third, she froze. A whisper, so soft she thought her mind had conjured it. But when she held her breath, it came again, low, indistinct, yet undeniably real. She tried the handle, still locked. Her heart pounded as she pulled back, staring at the crack beneath the door. The faintest flicker of light bled through. Suddenly, the whisper stopped. Clara's body stiffened. Someone inside the room knew she was there. Before she could retreat, the sound of a door opening echoed behind her. She spun around. At the far end of the hallway stood Sylvia, her hair loose, her expression unreadable. "You shouldn't wander at night," Sylvia said softly. "This house has memories." Clara clutched the page tighter. "Sylvia, what's behind these doors?" Sylvia's smile was faint, almost pitying. "You think they keep secrets locked away in wood and iron?" "No, Clara. The secrets walk among us." With that, Sylvia turned and disappeared into the shadows. Clara stood frozen, the silence pressing against her ears until it almost roared. She looked down at the torn page in her hand, at the jagged edge where it had been ripped from the journal. If someone had stolen the book, perhaps they hadn't stolen all of it. Perhaps the missing pages were scattered, hidden. Perhaps Eleanor had intended it this way. Back in her room, Clara tucked the page safely into her robe. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring into the dark, the words circling endlessly in her head. The key is already in her hands. But what key? And why did she feel, as she tried to close her eyes, that someone was standing just beyond her door, waiting for her to find out? Part 6. The Locked Door. What if the barrier you feared to cross was the only path to the truth? For days, Clara's thoughts circled around Eleanor's torn page like moths around a flame. The truth lives where silence breathes deepest. The key is already in her hands. The words were wrinkles, yet they pulsed with certainty. She knew the answer had to lie behind the locked doors of the forbidden wing. But how could she open them? The house itself seemed determined to keep its secrets. Every knob she turned was stubbornly fixed, every panel seamless. She considered asking Michael, but his dismissals of her questions had grown sharper, colder. Worse, she sensed he would tell the others if he knew how deeply she had been probing. The key. Eleanor had insisted Clara already possessed it. Clara scoured her belongings, searching through drawers, her jewelry case, even her old handbags. Nothing. Yet as she held the torn page one evening, her fingers brushed against the chain around her neck. The locket. It had been Eleanor's wedding gift to her, given with unusual ceremony on the morning she and Michael married. Eleanor had pressed it into her palm with the words, "This will always bring you back home." Clara had never thought much of it, only a piece of heirloom jewelry, heavy and old-fashioned. Now she stared at it with new eyes. The locket's design was intricate, its clasp stubborn. When she twisted it, the metal caught, almost like the teeth of a key. Her breath quickened. Could it be? That night, long after the others had retired, Clara stole down the corridor, locket clenched in her fist. The air in the forbidden wing was colder, the silence thicker, as if the house itself was holding its breath. She stopped before the third door, the one where she had heard whispers before. Her hand trembled as she slid the locket into the old iron keyhole. To her shock, it fit. Her heart hammered as she turned it. A faint click echoed in the hall. The door eased open, groaning on rusted hinges. Inside was darkness, stale and suffocating. Clara stepped cautiously over the threshold, her lantern casting long, trembling shadows. It was a study, smaller than she expected. Dust lay thick across the floor, but the desk at the center was strangely clean, as though someone had been using it. Papers were stacked neatly, and on top of them lay a fountain pen still glistening with ink. Clara's pulse quickened. She approached, scanning the sheets. They weren't ordinary notes. They were drafts of legal documents, wills, all bearing Eleanor's signature. But the names were wrong. Each draft left something to a different person. Sometimes Michael, sometimes Daniel, sometimes Margaret. But in every version, the amounts and properties shifted. Some wills cut Michael out entirely. Others left Sylvia the mansion. And in one, Clara herself was listed as the sole heir. Confusion knifed through her. Had Eleanor been rewriting her, endlessly, or had someone forged these papers, preparing to present whichever version suited them? A sound snapped her from her thoughts. The faintest shuffle of feet behind her. She spun, holding up the lantern. The doorway was empty. But then she saw it. A shadow, long and thin, retreating down the corridor. Someone had been watching. Clara's instinct screamed to follow. She rushed out, the lantern swinging wildly, but the hall was empty once more. The silence seemed to mock her, swallowing every trace of the intruder. Breathless, she returned to the study. But the papers, they were gone. The desk was bare. Not a single draft remained. She staggered back, the lantern shaking in her hand. How could they vanish so quickly? Had the shadows stolen them in the moment she stepped out? Or had she imagined them altogether? Her eyes darted around the room, desperate for something to prove she wasn't losing her mind. That's when she noticed the corner of the rug curled upward. Clara dropped to her knees and pulled it back. Beneath the rug was a small trapdoor, the wood nearly seamless against the floor. Her heart thundered. She pulled at the iron ring, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. She pressed her ear against it. At first, nothing. Then, a faint, steady sound. Breathing, Clara stumbled back, the lantern almost falling from her hand. Someone was beneath the floor. Someone alive. A sudden slam jolted her. The door behind her swung shut with a violent crack. The lantern flickered, nearly extinguishing. She rushed to the door, pulling the knob desperately. Locked. From the outside, trapped. Her breaths came fast, echoing in the suffocating silence. She pounded on the door, but no one answered. And then, from beneath the trap door, came a single sound, a whisper, so close it felt like it brushed against her ear. Clara. Part 7. The Whisper Below. What if the voice you heard in the dark belonged to someone who should not exist? Clara's blood turned cold as the whisper drifted up from the trap door. The voice had not been imagined. It was distinct, deliberate. It had spoken her name. She staggered back, lantern trembling in her hand. The locked study felt suddenly smaller, the air pressing down on her lungs. For a moment she considered screaming, but some instinct silenced her. The house was too vast, its corridors too empty. She doubted anyone would come. And if they did, would it be friend or foe? Her gaze fell once more to the trap door. The iron ring glinted faintly in the lamplight, as though beckoning. Her heart hammered in her chest. She crouched, pressing her ear to the wood. Silence. And then, a faint scratching, like fingernails dragging slowly across the underside of the planks. Clara. The whisper came again, softer, yet filled with urgency. She bit her lip, mind racing. Who could be beneath the floorboards? And how could they know her name? Her lantern sputtered, throwing her shadow long across the wall. She reached into her pocket, fumbling for something, anything, to pry open the trapdoor. Her fingers brushed the edge of her locket, and again Eleanor's words returned. The key is already in your hands. Her breath caught. Could the locket open this too? She fitted the locket into the keyhole near the trapdoor's hinge. The metal resisted at first, then clicked softly. The iron ring lifted with unexpected ease. Clara hesitated only a heartbeat before pulling. The wood groaned open, releasing a wave of cold, damp air that smelled of earth and mildew. A narrow stairway descended into darkness, the steps rough and unfinished. She raised the lantern, but its light seemed swallowed by the blackness below. Still, something moved, the faintest shift, the shape of someone crouched in shadow. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Who's there?" A pause. Then, almost like a sigh, the answer, "Not who you think." The sound of the words made her skin prickle. The voice was male, weary but sharp, like stone grinding on stone. She should have fled. Every instinct screamed at her to close the trap door and never return, but curiosity anchored her. Eleanor's final word still haunted her. "It was never meant for you. If answers lived anywhere, surely they lived here." Step by step, Clara descended. The air grew colder, the silence deeper, broken only by the drip of unseen water. When she reached the bottom, her lantern revealed a low earthen chamber, and there, sitting on a crude wooden bench, was a man. His hair was long and matted, his clothes little more than rags, but his eyes were startlingly clear, intelligent, watchful. They locked onto hers with unnerving familiarity. Clara's throat tightened. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head, almost amused. "The better question is, who told you I was gone?" Confusion spun through her. She stepped closer, lifting the lantern higher. The man flinched from the light, raising a trembling hand. "I was told—" Clara hesitated, her voice barely audible. "Everyone said Eleanor's husband died decades ago." The man gave a slow, bitter smile. "Did they now?" The lantern wavered in her grip. Eleanor's husband, William Whitmore, had supposedly drowned in a sailing accident years before Clara even met Michael. His portrait still hung in the grand hall, painted in oil, the face of a man frozen in youthful authority. But the figure before her, aged and wasted though he was, bore the unmistakable echo of that same jawline, those same piercing eyes. "No," Clara whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't possible." "Possible?" His voice rasped with dry laughter. "My dear, you're standing in the impossible. Eleanor locked it away with the rest of her sins." The words pierced her like a knife. Eleanor had kept him here, hidden him away while the world believed him dead? But why? "Why are you here?" Clara demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man leaned forward, shadows clinging to his face. "Because your mother-in-law decided the truth was too dangerous. She needed me silenced. And now—" His eyes narrowed, glinting in the lantern's glow. "Now she's dead, which means the silence is broken." Clara's pulse raced. Everything she thought she knew about the Whitmore family, their legacy, their wealth, their carefully constructed image, suddenly cracked like glass under strain. But before she could ask more, the man's gaze darted upward. He raised a finger to his lips, warning. Above them, faint footsteps echoed through the study. Someone was in the room. Clara's breath caught. She doused the lantern instinctively, plunging them into near darkness. She clutched the stair rail as the floorboards above creaked. Whoever it was moved slowly, deliberately, pausing as though listening. Then, silence. The man leaned closer, his whisper barely audible. "They'll come for you now. You've opened the door that was never meant to be opened." Clara swallowed hard, her thoughts colliding. Who's coming?" But the man only gave that same bitter smile, his face shadowed. "Ask yourself, Clara, who benefits most from Eleanor's death?" Her chest tightened, the weight of the question sinking like stone. And for the first time since Eleanor's last words, Clara felt certain she was in a story where she was no longer the daughter-in-law. She was the target. Part 8. Family Shadows. What if the people closest to you were the very ones hiding the darkest truths? Clara shut the trap door gently, pressing down until it sealed with a soft thud. The study above was still, but she could swear the air retained the echo of those footsteps. Her palms were slick with sweat, her heartbeat refusing to calm. The memory of the man below, the supposed ghost of the Whitmore legacy, burned in her mind. She turned the iron lock carefully, sliding the locket back into place. To anyone else, the floor looked undisturbed, but Clara knew the truth lay just beneath her feet, breathing, watching, waiting. By the time she returned to the mansion's main hall, the family had gathered around the long dining table. The chandeliers glowed warmly overhead, their light glinting against crystal glasses and polished silver. Yet beneath the glitter lay an unease she could now feel vibrating through every word, every glance. Michael looked up first, his brow furrowed. "Clara, you've been gone a while. Everything all right?" Her throat tightened. For a throat second she considered telling him, but then she saw the tension in his jaw, the restless way he tapped his fork against the plate. He was hiding something, too. She forced a smile. "Just needed some air." Across the table, Margaret adjusted her pearl necklace with deliberate precision, eyes lingering on Clara a fraction too long. Evelyn stirred her soup, her lips curved into something between a smile and a smirk. Thomas, the youngest, scrolled, idly on his phone. But even he shot Clara a quick assessing glance when he thought no one was watching. The silence stretched. Forks clinked, glasses chimed, but conversation felt rehearsed, hollow. Clara sat down, aware of how every gesture of hers seemed to ripple through the room, like a disturbance in still water. "So," Evelyn finally said, her tone airy, "I suppose we're still waiting on the lawyer to finish sorting through Mother's complicated documents." Michael shifted in his seat. "It takes time. You know how thorough she was." Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "Thorough, yes, but not invincible. Papers can be lost, or altered." Her eyes flicked briefly toward Clara, as if testing her reaction. Clara kept her expression neutral, though her stomach twisted. Did Evelyn know about the journal? About the missing pages? Thomas let out a short laugh. "You're all paranoid. It's a will, not a treasure hunt." But his words only deepened Clara's unease. If only he knew. She excused herself earlier than usual, retreating to her room, closing the heavy oak door behind her. She pressed her back against it, inhaling sharply. Shadows pooled in the corners as moonlight filtered through the tall windows. For the first time since Eleanor's death, Clara felt the walls of the mansion were not walls of protection, but of entrapment. Her gaze wandered to the mirror above the dresser. She caught her own reflection, eyes wide, restless. But then, something shifted, a flicker. For a heartbeat she thought she saw another face over her shoulder, male, watching. She spun around. Nothing, only the curtains swaying lightly from a draft. Her chest tightened. Had he escaped from below, or was her Mind betraying her? The floor creaked outside her door. Clara froze, ears straining. A pause, then a faint shuffle, like someone lingering, listening. She whispered almost to herself, "Michael?" Silence. Then retreating steps, fading into the corridor. Clara's hands trembled as she latched the door, sliding the bolt in place. She sat on the edge of the bed, head in her hands. The man's words echoed. "Ask yourself, Clara, who benefits most from Eleanor's death?" Her eyes darted toward the drawer where she'd hidden the journal. She pulled it out, thumbing again, through the final written page. The inked words seemed to pulse with new menace. "The one you trust is the one you should fear." Her breath caught. Which one? Michael, her husband who avoided her gaze. Evelyn with her sly insinuations. Margaret, silent but watchful, or Thomas, pretending detachment while observing everything? The mansion groaned with night noises, each one amplified by her paranoia. Every shadow seemed alive, every silence heavy with unsaid truths. Clara lay down but left the lantern burning, its flame flickering against the ceiling. She told herself sleep would not come, but exhaustion eventually dragged her under. And in the half-world of dreams, she heard it again, faint but undeniable. A whisper. Her name. This time, though, it wasn't coming from below. It was inside her room. Part 9. The Stranger's Claim. What if a single knock on the door could unravel everything you thought you owned? The next morning, the Whitmore mansion was cloaked in a strange quiet. Clara moved through the halls, still shaken by the whisper, in her room the night before. She hadn't told Michael or anyone what she heard. How could she, when she wasn't even sure if it was real? Breakfast was a strained affair. Margaret picked at her toast in silence. Evelyn sipped coffee with that same unreadable half-smile, and Thomas looked as though he hadn't slept. Michael buried himself in the day's newspaper, though Clara noticed he hadn't turned a page in nearly 15 minutes. Then came the knock. Sharp, confident. Not the hesitant tap of a visitor, but the claim of someone who believed they belonged. The family exchanged uneasy glances before Michael rose, folding the paper and walking to the grand double doors. He opened them slowly. On the threshold stood a man Clara had never seen before. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored gray suit, his dark hair neatly combed back. His eyes, a striking pale green, scanned the family with cool detachment. "Good morning," he said, voice smooth as polished glass. "My name is Adrian Blackwood. I believe you've been expecting me." Evelyn gave a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. "Expecting you? Hardly. And who exactly are you?" The stranger's smile was faint, almost mocking. "The rightful heir. Or at least one of them." The air in the hall thickened. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. Thomas muttered a curse under his breath. Michael stiffened, his hand tightening on the doorframe. Clara's heart lurched. Another heir? Adrian stepped inside uninvited, as though the house itself acknowledged him. He set a leather satchel on the table and unfastened its brass clasp. From within, he withdrew a stack of yellowed papers, bound with a crimson ribbon. "These," he said, laying them out carefully, "are authenticated documents signed by Eleanor Whitmore herself. They state quite explicitly that a portion of the Whitmore estate was to be transferred to me." Silence. The only sound was the faint tick of the grandfather clock. Michael's voice broke first, low and tight. "This is absurd. My mother would never—" Adrian cut him off with a measured glance. "Would never what? Keep secrets? Tell lies? Lock away truths she deemed inconvenient? You of all people should know better." Clara's stomach knotted. His words carried a dangerous confidence. as if he knew things none of them wanted spoken aloud. Evelyn leaned forward, her tone laced with venom. "And who exactly are you to us, Mr. Blackwood? Some long-lost cousin? A charlatan sniffing around for scraps?" Adrian's pale green eyes flicked to hers, then to Margaret, then finally resting on Clara. The weight of his gaze made her pulse quicken. "I am," he said slowly. The son Eleanor tried to erase. The words detonated like a bomb. Margaret gasped audibly. Thomas's phone slipped from his hand, and Michael staggered back as though struck. Clara felt the room spin around her. "A lie!" Michael spat. His face had gone ashen. "My mother had no other children." Adrian's smile widened, though it never reached his eyes. "Didn't she? Or did she simply tell you what she needed you to believe? Families like yours thrive on shadows, Mr. Whitmore, and I was kept in one for far too long." Clara's thoughts flashed to the man in the chamber below. Could there be a connection? Was Adrian tied to that impossible secret she had uncovered? Margaret's voice trembled. "If this is true, why now? Why come forward after her death?" Adrian's tone cooled, his composure unwavering. "Because the dead cannot deny the truth, and because the will, her real will, names me, I intend to claim what is mine." He slid one final document across the table. The wax seal bore Eleanor's unmistakable crest. Evelyn snatched it up, scanning the contents with feverish eyes. Her lips parted, then pressed tightly shut. Whatever she saw, she refused to speak aloud. Michael tore the paper from her hands. His jaw clenched as he read, the color draining from his face. This is impossible," he whispered. Adrian leaned back in his chair, utterly at ease amidst their unraveling composure. "Oh, it's not only possible, it's inevitable. You've all been living a lie. Eleanor's legacy is not yours alone." Clara stared at him, unease coiling in her chest. Something about Adrian's presence was too deliberate, too rehearsed. He hadn't just arrived to claim an inheritance. He had come to dismantle the family from the inside out. And yet, part of her couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's whispered last words had been leading to this moment. Adrian gathered the remaining documents, slipping them back into his satchel. He rose, his expression calm but final. "You have until the reading of the will," he said. "After that, whether you accept me or not, the law will." With that, he turned and strode toward the door. The sound of it closing echoed like a gunshot through the mansion. The family sat in stunned silence, the air heavy with disbelief and fear. Clara's fingers tightened around the edge of her chair, her thoughts racing. Had Eleanor truly hidden another son? Or was Adrian a carefully constructed lie? And more chilling still, what if both were true? Part 10. Secrets at Midnight. What if the answers you seek only reveal more shadows? The mansion slept uneasily that night. Heavy curtains dulled the moonlight, but the silence of the old house was alive. Floorboards shifting, pipes groaning, wind seeping through cracks like whispers. Clara lay in bed, her eyes wide open, replaying Adrian Blackwood's words again and again. The son Eleanor tried to erase. She turned onto her side, clutching the edge of the blanket. Her mind spun with impossible images. Eleanor, younger, carrying a child no one ever spoke of. Eleanor cold and calculating, rewriting the family history. And then the man in the chamber below, the one who claimed to be William Whitmore. If Adrian was telling the truth, how did his story fit with the hidden prisoner beneath her feet? Sleep would not come. The questions clawed too deeply. Finally Clara rose. She lit a small lamp and slipped on her robe, careful not to wake Michael. He stirred slightly, muttering something incoherent, but didn't open his eyes. The hallways stretched long and empty, their wallpaper faded, their portraits watching. Each face seemed more accusatory than the last. Clara carried the lamp close, her footsteps muffled on the runner carpet. She didn't know exactly where she was going, only that she had to move, had to search. Her instincts drew her back toward Eleanor's private quarters. Since the funeral, no one had dared linger there. The air around the door felt heavier, colder, as though Eleanor's presence had not fully departed. Clara hesitated only a moment before turning the handle. The room was exactly as it had been on the night Eleanor died. The bed remained neatly made, the wardrobe doors closed, the writing desk stacked with letters bound in ribbon. Dust motes swirled in the lamplight, disturbed by her breath. Clara set the lamp down and began to search. She opened the drawers carefully, scanning through stacks of correspondence. Bills, invitations, family accounts, all meticulously organized. Nothing that hinted at Adrian, nothing that explained the man beneath the floor. Then she noticed the mirror. It hung above the vanity, framed in gilded wood, its surface slightly clouded with age. At first it seemed ordinary, reflecting only Clara's pale face and tired eyes. But when she leaned closer, her fingertips brushed against the frame, and something shifted, a soft click. Her breath caught. She pressed again, and the mirror swung outward on hidden hinges, revealing a shallow recess in the wall. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a leather-bound book. Clara's hands shook as she pulled it free. The book was heavier than it looked. The leather cracked but intact. She set it on the vanity and unwrapped it slowly. It was another journal, but unlike the one she had already found, this one was older. The pages were yellowed, the ink faded in places. Clara opened it carefully, scanning the first entries. Her pulse quickened. The handwriting was Eleanor's, but younger, more fluid, and the words chilled her. March 4th, 1968. He is born. I was warned not to let this happen, but I could not deny fate. William must never know. The family must never know. His name will be Adrian. Clara's breath caught. She traced the name with trembling fingers. Adrian. The stranger's claim wasn't fabricated. Eleanor herself had written it. She flipped further, scanning in disbelief. October 12th, 1970. They ask where the child is. I tell them he was sent away, lost in sickness. They believe me. They must. It is the only way to protect the others. Page after page told a story Eleanor had buried. A hidden child sent away, unspoken of for decades. Clara's heart raced. Adrian wasn't lying. He was Eleanor's son. But why hide him? Why pretend he never existed? Clara turned another page, desperate for clarity. The ink grew more frantic, the lines slanting wildly. March 3rd, 1980. William, suspects. He searches the ledgers, the letters. If he finds out, everything collapses. I must act quickly. Silence is the only solution. Clara froze. The implication was unmistakable. Eleanor had silenced William, perhaps not through death, but through something darker. Her mind reeled back to the man below, the prisoner in the hidden chamber. His bitter words. Eleanor locked it away with the rest of her sins. It was all connected. A creak at the doorway jolted her from thought. Clara snapped the journal shut, clutching it to her chest. "Clara?" Michael's voice, groggy, suspicious. He stood in the shadows, hair disheveled, eyes narrowing at the side of the lamp and the book in her hands. "What are you doing here?" She forced a shaky smile. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd tidy up." Michael's gaze lingered on the journal. For a moment she thought he'd press further, but then he sighed, rubbing his forehead. "This house is making us all restless," he turned back toward the hall, muttering something about needing water. Clara exhaled, relief flooding her. But as she looked down at the journal again, a final line at the bottom of the page caught her eye. One day, the truth will return to claim what is his, but he must never meet the other. Her pulse stopped. The other. The words echoed like thunder in her mind. Adrian. The man below. 2 secrets. 2 heirs. Her hands shook violently as she closed the book, the final question clawing at her chest. Who exactly was Eleanor protecting? Adrian, or the ghost locked beneath the mansion? Part 11. The Watcher in the Dark. What if every secret you uncover has already been seen by someone else? The next day dawned gray. The mansion crouched beneath heavy skies. Clara had slept little, her dreams filled with mirrors that opened into endless corridors and whispers that belonged to no one. She kept the journal close, hidden beneath layers of clothing in her suitcase. It felt like a weight pressing into her ribs with every breath. Over breakfast, the atmosphere was strained. Michael busied himself with the newspaper, his eyes darting too quickly across the page. Emily stirred her tea without drinking, her lips pressed tight. Even Daniel, who usually spoke with nervous chatter, was silent. Only the sound of forks scraping plates filled the room. Clara sensed it then, the shift. It wasn't just grief anymore. Suspicion had entered the house. When she excused herself and stepped into the hall, she felt it again. That crawling sensation along her spine, as though eyes lingered on her back long after she moved out of sight. She paused, glancing toward the grand staircase, but the landing was empty. Still, her pulse skipped. By afternoon, the unease had grown unbearable. Clara decided to walk the grounds, hoping fresh air would clear her thoughts. She wandered the garden paths, past Eleanor's marble statues, their moss-covered faces frozen in eternal judgment. Even outdoors she couldn't shake it, the sense that footsteps trailed just out of sync with hers. She spun suddenly, her breath catching. No one. Only the roses, heavy with dew, their thorns glistening like teeth. Am I imagining this? She wondered. Or was someone truly following her? That night, the house grew oppressive again. The wind rattled shutters. The old pipes moaned. Clara sat at the writing desk in her room, trying to focus on the journal. Her lamp cast a small circle of light, beyond which shadows deepened. She read Eleanor's words again, tracing each letter like it might vanish if she looked away. He must never meet the other. But the deeper she read, the more she noticed something strange. Entries missing, torn out carefully, as though by a hand that knew exactly what to hide. Clara's stomach churned. Someone else had already rifled through these pages before her, someone who didn't want the truth fully known. A soft creak interrupted her thoughts. She froze. It came from the hallway just beyond her door. Not the settling of the house, not the random groan of wood. This was deliberate. A weight shifting, a floorboard pressed. Clara set the journal down slowly. Her breath grew shallow. She reached for the lamp's knob, extinguishing the flame. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by a thin slice of moonlight across the floor. She waited. At first, silence. Then, the faintest sound of breathing. Just beyond the door, Clara's heart thundered. She pressed a hand against her mouth to stifle it. Whoever stood there wasn't moving. They were listening, waiting. Minutes passed like hours. Then, at last, the soft rhythm of footsteps retreated down the corridor. Clara exhaled shakily, her hands trembling. She didn't dare move until the silence felt whole again. When she relit the lamp, the journal's cover seemed darker, heavier, as if it absorbed the dread. The next morning, Clara decided she needed confirmation. She couldn't live in suspicion alone. She began to test the house, leaving small objects in precise places, noting the angle of a chair, the way a drawer was closed. By evening, 2 of them had shifted ever so slightly. Her suspicions hardened. Someone was, indeed, watching her, entering her room when she was gone. That night, Clara devised a plan. She left the journal under her pillow, deliberately peeking its edge into view. Then she pretended to sleep, lying stiff beneath the covers, her breaths even and shallow. The lamp was off, but her eyes remained open in the dark, adjusting to the faint glow of moonlight. Hours passed. The clock ticked softly. Wind rattled the branches outside. Then it came, the door easing open so slowly it almost blended with the silence. A darker shadow slipped inside, careful, deliberate. Clara's blood froze. She resisted every instinct to move, to cry out. The figure crept closer, pausing at the foot of her bed. Even in the faint light, she could not make out a face, only the outline of shoulders, the careful tilt of a head, the quiet inhale of someone standing far too near. Then the shadow bent. A hand reached toward the pillow where the journal lay, hidden. Clara's heart pounded so loud she feared it would give her away. She gripped the blanket tightly, forcing herself still. The hand hovered for a moment, then withdrew. The shadow straightened, hesitated, and slipped silently from the room. Only when the door clicked shut did Clara sit upright, gasping for air. She clutched the journal to her chest, every nerve in her body trembling. There was no more doubt. Someone in this house didn't just know about the secrets. They wanted to control them, to take them. But who? Her family? Adrian? Or someone else entirely lurking behind the walls? And more terrifying still, how long had the watcher been there, moving, in the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike? Part 12. The mirror's secret. What if the reflection you see isn't yours at all, but someone else's truth staring back? Morning light spilled reluctantly into the mansion, filtered by heavy curtains. Clara had hardly slept, her mind replaying the silent figure that had hovered over her bed. The journal rested beneath her pillow now, warm from her body heat, as though she feared it would vanish the second she let it go. After breakfast, another strained ritual filled with darting glances and hollow conversations, Clara slipped away, driven by a restless pull. Her steps carried her to Eleanor's old chambers once again. The room smelled faintly of lavender and dust. Sunlight struck the tall mirror by the far wall, a gilded thing Eleanor had once polished daily. Clara paused, recalling something. Eleanor's habit of standing before it late at night, whispering words Clara could never quite catch. Clara approached. Her reflection stared back, pale and tired, her eyes dark with sleeplessness. She tilted her head, mimicking the way she had once seen Eleanor do. For a moment, she almost expected her mother-in-law's image to replace her own. Then she noticed it, something subtle. The mirror's frame didn't sit flush against the wall. Along one side, near the baseboard, the wood jutted just slightly outward. Clara crouched, her fingers trembling as she traced the edge. A draft brushed her skin. Her pulse quickened. With careful pressure she pushed. The mirror groaned softly, then pivoted on a hidden hinge, swinging forward like a door. Behind it yawned a narrow cavity, black as pitch. Clara swallowed hard. Inside, she found a wooden shelf carved into the wall. Dust lay thick, but certain patches were clean, disturbed recently. Something or someone had been here. At the back of the shelf sat a small wooden box, locked with a brass clasp. Clara pulled it out, her breath shallow, her hands shaking. She set it on the vanity table and studied it. The wood bore initials carved faintly. E.W. Eleanor Whitmore. Clara searched the room for a key. Drawers, cushions, beneath the rug. Nothing. Finally, her eyes drifted to the mirror again. She touched its frame, running her fingers along the ornate carvings of vines and roses. Her thumb pressed one rosebud, and with a sharp click, a tiny panel opened, releasing a delicate brass key. Clara's heart raced. She slid the key into the clasp. The lock opened with a quiet snap. Inside the box lay a stack of folded letters, yellowed with age but carefully tied with a silk ribbon. Beneath them, a silver locket glinted, its surface etched with swirling patterns. Clara lifted it, her fingers tingling. She opened the locket and froze. Inside was not Eleanor's portrait, nor Michael's, nor any family members. Instead, it contained a miniature photograph of a young man Clara had never seen before. His eyes were sharp, his smile almost mocking. Tucked behind the photograph was a slip of paper bearing a single name written in Eleanor's distinct hand, Adrian. Clara's stomach tightened. The stranger, the man who had appeared at the funeral with quiet certainty. The letters beckoned. Clara untied the ribbon, her eyes racing over the inked words. They were love letters, tender yet laced with fear. Eleanor had written them to this Adrian decades ago, hiding a relationship no one else had known. The tone shifted with each letter, first passion, then desperation, then warnings. One line burned into Clara's mind. If the family discovers the truth about the heir, everything will shatter. You must remain hidden until the time is right. Clara's throat went dry. The heir? Was Adrian not just a lover, but tied by blood, a son born in secret? The letters ended abruptly, as though torn from time itself. Clara searched the box again, but something was missing. The dust marks on the shelf had told her as much. Someone had already removed other papers, perhaps the very ones that explained the full truth. Suddenly the air in the room shifted. Clara stiffened. She wasn't alone. Turning slowly, she caught sight of the mirror, still ajar, and for the briefest moment she swore the reflection wasn't hers. A darker silhouette lingered just behind her shoulder, taller, broader. When she spun around, the room was empty. Her breath came fast. She shoved the letters and locket back into the box, locking it quickly and returning it to the hidden cavity. The mirror creaked as she pressed it shut again, sealing the secret away. But the secret was no longer safe. Clara knew now that Eleanor's last words, her cryptic warning, weren't spoken out of madness. They were aimed at someone, maybe at Adrian, maybe at the family, maybe at all of them. And as Clara left the chamber, the hallway stretching before her in suffocating silence, a single thought echoed in her mind. If Eleanor had kept Adrian hidden all these years, what else had she concealed in the mansion's shadows? And worse, who else already knew? Part 13. The Confession Room. What if the walls of a house could remember every sin whispered within them? The discovery of the hidden box left Clara restless, her mind gnawed by possibilities. Adrian's photograph haunted her, the name carved. In Eleanor's hand felt heavier than the locket itself. If Adrian truly was part of this family, how far had Eleanor gone to hide him? The following evening, Clara's search for answers brought her again to the West Wing. Few dared enter this part of the house. The corridor was narrow, the wallpaper peeling in places, the air colder than the rest of the mansion. It smelled faintly of mildew and something older, something sealed away. Her lantern flickered as she moved, illuminating portraits whose eyes followed her. At the end of the corridor she found a door, plain, unmarked, locked. She remembered Eleanor's journal entries, words written in cryptic loops. When guilt became unbearable, I wrote in the room that forgave me. Clara's hands shook as she tried the handle. Locked. She searched the walls, her fingertips brushing uneven plaster until she felt it. A groove, cleverly hidden behind a loose strip of wallpaper. Pressing it released a latch. The door creaked, open on stiff hinges. A rush of stale air hit her. Inside, the space was narrow, more like a chamber carved into the mansion's bones. A single chair sat at the center, facing a wooden writing desk. Shelves lined the walls, filled with notebooks, loose sheets of paper and wax-sealed envelopes. A thick layer of dust coated everything, except for the desk itself, which bore fresh marks of use. Clara's pulse quickened. Someone else had been here recently. She stepped inside. Her lantern cast long shadows that bent across the room like accusatory fingers. On the desk lay a small phonograph, its needle poised above a record. Clara hesitated, then wound the crank and lowered the arm. The static hissed. Then Eleanor's voice filled the chamber, frail yet resolute. "If anyone hears this, it means I failed to destroy it. This room holds every sin I could not bury. My family thinks wealth protects them, but it only sharpens their greed. I could never tell them the truth. About him." Clara's throat tightened. Eleanor's words trembled with both fear and longing. "Adrian. My blood. My secret. The one child I could never acknowledge. If Michael knew, he would burn the world to keep the fortune his alone. But Adrian has as much claim as any of them. More, perhaps. He is my true heir." Clara staggered back, nearly dropping the lantern. The phonograph crackled on. "But secrets rot in silence. And I fear it will not be the money that destroys this family, but the lies. If Adrian comes forward, they will tear him apart. If he stays hidden, his anger will grow until it consumes everything. I don't know which is worse." The recording ended in a low hiss. Clara's mind raced. Eleanor had admitted it openly. Adrian wasn't just a stranger. He was her son, kept from the world, denied by her own pride and fear. Her eyes darted to the shelves. She pulled down notebooks, flipping through frantic handwriting. Confessions spilled out, accounts of private deals, betrayals, bribes Eleanor had orchestrated to keep her secret intact. Names of lawyers, servants paid to remain silent, even hints of a forged will hidden somewhere in the house. One line chilled her more than all the rest. The other heir must never meet him. If they do, the truth cannot be contained. The other heir. Clara's heart pounded. Who was Eleanor protecting or pitting against Adrian? A sudden noise broke her thoughts, the faint scrape of footsteps in the corridor outside. She froze. The door was still ajar. Shadows danced just beyond it, shifting against the crack of right. Someone had followed her here. Clara extinguished the lantern, plunging the chamber into darkness. She pressed herself against the wall, her breath caught in her throat. The footsteps paused at the threshold. The silence stretched, thick and unbearable. Then the door creaked wider, and a shape slipped inside. Clara bit her lip to stop from gasping. Whoever it was carried no light. The figure moved with certainty, as though they already knew the room. Their hand brushed the desk, fingers lingering. On the phonograph, then a whisper, low and sharp, "She knows." Clara's skin went cold. The voice was unmistakable. Michael, her husband. Clara's chest tightened. Michael had known about the confession room all along. He had heard these recordings, read these pages. He wasn't just grieving his mother. He was protecting a secret that could destroy his claim to everything. She remained frozen in the dark, her body trembling as Michael gathered a stack of letters from the shelf and tucked them into his coat. Then, with the same silence he entered, he slipped out, leaving the door ajar. Clara's knees nearly buckled. Michael knew about Adrian. He knew about the other heir, and if Eleanor's words were true, he would do anything to keep them apart. Part 14. The Last Heir. What if the person you thought was a stranger carried the same blood as you? The day of the family meeting arrived with storm clouds heavy above the estate. Clara stood in the drawing room, her hands clasped tightly to hide their tremble. Michael had called the gathering abruptly, insisting everyone must be present. Emily sat stiff-backed by the fireplace, her lips pale, while Daniel shifted nervously in his chair. Even the servants lingered at the edges of the room, drawn by curiosity. And then Adrian entered. He carried himself with a calmness that seemed out of place amidst the tension. His dark eyes swept the room, landing on Clara for the briefest moment before settling on Michael. "I think it's time," Adrian said, his voice steady, deep. "Time you all knew the truth." Michael rose from his chair. His jaw was set, his fists clenched. "The only truth that matters is my mother's will. And it names me." Adrian's mouth curved into a faint smile. "Does it? Or does it name her heir?" He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded letter. The room collectively leaned forward as he laid it on the table. The paper was old, Eleanor's handwriting looping in black ink. Clara recognized it instantly from the journal. Michael's face drained of color. Emily gasped. "What is this?" Adrian's eyes softened just enough to let the weight of his words land. "My mother's confession. Eleanor Whitmore was not only your matriarch, she was my mother too. She kept me hidden but not forgotten, and in her private words, she named me as her rightful son, the last heir." The silence was thick, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Clara's heart hammered. This was the truth she had uncovered, in the confession room now spoken aloud. Michael's voice was cold when it came. Lies, convenient lies from a man who appears out of nowhere, just as the fortune is at stake. But Adrian's composure didn't waver. He reached into his coat again, pulling out a locket, the same one Clara had seen in the hidden box. He opened it, revealing the miniature photograph and Eleanor's etched signature beneath it. "She gave me this. Proof of who I am. Proof of what she could never say in public." Emily stood, her voice trembling. "If this is true, then everything changes." Michael slammed his fist against the table, the sound sharp as thunder. "Nothing changes. This man is an imposter. He's here to steal what is ours, what I've protected all my life." Clara flinched at his words. "Protected or hidden?" Adrian's gaze hardened. "You've protected nothing. You've lived off illusions, Michael. You've built your power on lies. Eleanor wanted me to stay away until the right time, but she left enough for me to claim what is mine." The room erupted, Emily demanding clarity, Daniel muttering that he always suspected secrets, the servants whispering behind their hands. Clara remained silent, her mind racing. She had heard Eleanor's voice on the phonograph, read her words, touched the proof herself. Adrian wasn't lying. But to side with him openly now would mean tearing her life with Michael apart. Michael's eyes darted to her, sharp and dangerous. "Clara, tell them. Tell them this man is nothing more than a fraud." Her mouth went dry. She opened it, then closed it again. The truth pressed against her throat like a blade. Adrian's voice softened. "Clara, you've read her words, haven't you?" The entire room turned to her. Clara's breath caught. The journal burned in her memory, Eleanor's confession ringing in her ears. She could feel Michael's stare, filled with fury, and Adrian's, filled with something more, a plea for recognition. Her silence spoke louder than words. Michael's face twisted. "So it's true. You've been conspiring with him." "I've done nothing," Clara whispered, but even to her own ears it sounded hollow. Adrian stepped forward, his voice rising. "I am not here to destroy this family. I am here because Eleanor wanted the truth to live. Whether you accept me or not, I am her blood, and blood cannot be erased." The storm outside broke then, rain hammering the windows, thunder shaking the walls. The family sat in stunned silence as the weight of Adrian's claims settled on them like the storm's shadow. Finally Emily spoke, her tone trembling but resolute. "Then the question is not whether Adrian belongs to this family. It's whether this family can survive knowing he does." The fire hissed as rain found its way down the chimney. Clara shivered. Eleanor's secret was no longer buried. The last heir had risen, but in the shadows of the mansion, Clara couldn't shake the sense that this revelation was only the beginning, and that Eleanor's final words still held a meaning no one yet understood. Part 15. The Final Echo. What if the answers you seek are hidden not in the present, but in the echoes of a voice that refuses to die? The storm had passed, but the mansion remained cloaked in a deeper silence. The revelation of Adrian's claim had fractured the Whitmore family into jagged shards. Michael stalked the halls like a predator. Emily shut herself away with her grief, and Daniel drank in restless gulps of whiskey, muttering to no one in particular. Clara drifted between them, a silent witness to the collapse. She no longer felt like part of a family, but rather like someone trapped inside a play whose ending had been written long ago. The journal, the locket, the letters, they weren't just relics. They were weapons, and now every eye in the house seemed to search for them. That night, Clara returned to the confession room. She needed answers. Eleanor's scattered words had not given her. Her lantern flickered against the shelves. Dust motes swirled, suspended, in still air. On the desk lay another record, half hidden beneath loose papers. She hadn't seen it before. Heart pounding, she placed it on the phonograph, lowered the needle, and listened. The static gave way to Eleanor's weary voice. "If you are hearing this, then the storm has already broken. I know my children. They will tear each other apart for the scraps I leave behind. But there is one truth I must seal here because I could never say it in life." Clara's chest tightened. "Adrian is my son, but he is not the only one. The other heir lives among you, unaware, blind to their own blood. If they discover each other, the Whitmore name will collapse. That is the curse I could not undo." Clara's breath hitched. "Another heir, another secret." The recording hissed and clicked, then ended abruptly. Her mind raced. Who was the second heir? Eleanor's words echoed, pressing down on her like a suffocating weight. Adrian wasn't the end of the story. He was only half of it. Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Clara spun, lantern raised. In the doorway stood Michael, his face pale, his eyes burning. He had heard. "You knew," he said hoarsely. "You knew all along." "I only just found this," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. Michael's gaze darkened. "Don't lie. To me. You've been protecting him." He stepped into the room, shadows sharpening his features. For a moment Clara thought he might strike her, but instead he reached past her and snatched the record from the phonograph. "No one else hears this," he growled. "Do you understand? Not Adrian, not Emily, not anyone. If the other heir exists, they can never know. It will destroy everything." He stormed out, clutching the record like a lifeline, leaving Clara shaking. She returned to her room, her mind spinning. Adrian was Eleanor's son, yes. But Eleanor's confession had made it clear there was another. Clara stared at the mirror in her chamber. For a moment, her reflection seemed strange, almost unfamiliar. Her own doubts rose, unbidden, terrifying. Could it be Emily? Daniel? Someone outside the family? Or... The thought clawed at her throat. Or could it be me? Her mother had never spoken much of her past, her childhood marked with gaps Clara had long ago accepted. But now, those silences pressed on her with unbearable weight. Had Eleanor chosen her son for Michael simply to keep her close? To keep her secret safe? The rain began again outside, tapping the windows like impatient fingers. Clara lay awake until dawn, the journal clutched to her chest. At breakfast, Adrian appeared calm, though his eyes lingered on her longer than before, searching, questioning. Michael refused to meet her gaze. Emily sat silent, lost in thought. Whitmore family had become a house of ghosts. each haunted by truths spoken and unspoken. As Clara rose from the table, her mind echoed with Eleanor's voice, that final warning etched forever into her thoughts. If they discover each other, the Whitmore name will collapse. Clara paused at the doorway, her heart thudding, her breath shallow. Two heirs, two shadows in the same house. But only one question remained, stretching endlessly in her mind like the corridors of the mansion itself. Who is the other heir?